And it's built by the very trees that used to grow on this land. So the forest that used to be here is now in that building. This is our bunny hutch. If you want to take a quick look, they are usually quite going inside at this point in time, but Winston and Kay are usually poking out. There we go. So these are our English locks. All the animals we have on our property are heritage breeds. That means that there was the same type of animal that grew on that would have been on this farm all those years ago. So 150 years ago or so. And then so you have three bunnies: Winston in the front, Kay in the back, and Manny likes to hide because he just doesn't like people. Hares and rabbits. English locks are actually more of a pet, often given to that middle class upper. The doctor's office. So as we walk down, we'll go through the family entrance and go through Ward's office. Now, this building actually used to be a temperance hall. In the early 19th century, we get the starting movement of the temperance movement. So, movement to stop allowing the movement to ban alcohol, to stop things like drinking and drugs, and it was really pushed by a lot of like middle class, upper class women, church women specifically. So they started building temperance halls to kind of persuade men to start going for non-alcoholic drinks after work rather than getting a pint at the pub. In the UK, that was replaced with coffee carts instead. So this here is the parlor area. You'll notice it's quite well furnished. But for a moment, we're going to talk here. And if you'd like, feel free to have a seat here. You can't sit everywhere in our buildings, but here you may. So, just for a moment, we're going to look at a few of the different tools used and some of the newer inventions, newer series that are appearing at this time. So, for instance, let's go. We'll go from easy to hard. See if you guys can guess what these things are. Any guesses?
The key?
Well, we call it a tooth key. So at this point in time, dentists were not really a regulated practice. Your doctor was your dentist. You'd go in and get your tooth pulled out if you had a cavity. So this would go under your tooth and you would twist it, and it has a very cool mechanism that with just a bit of a twist, it gives it a good amount of torque, and you can see the blood pooling in my end of my finger, showing how strong it is. And then you can pull the tooth out. Now, people often ask if it hurt. At this point, we do have anesthesia appearing in the field. The anesthesia, though, is opioids and morphine, specifically.
Okay.
So, not the best anesthesia going around. Now, this one here is called the trepanner. So, if you look there, there's a bit of a drill at the end, the long, sharp object. There we are. And this practice is done to this day, and it's been done for thousands of years. If you've ever seen someone with a hole in their skull, it was a way of almost draining a part of the brain. So we actually have some of my coworkers, two coworkers who have survived this day because of trepanning in the modern era. Though at this point in time, trepanning wasn't done as properly. It wasn't done appropriately, and it did cause a lot of damage to various people. But this is what allows you to put a hole in the skull of someone. Now, our last one, quick warning, though I assume you already figured this out. I'm going to talk about blood for a moment. So if you don't like blood, I ask that you leave the room right now. This here is my favorite. Does anyone know what this is? Anyone know what a leech is? The animal. Anyone can give me a description?
Sucks blood.
Sucks blood. Very good. For a long time, you've been using leeches to suck your blood out of you because since the early ancient Greeks, we have been following this idea of the four humors. Your body had four liquids in it: blood, phlegm or mucus, black bile, yellow bile. These liquids have to be kept in order, or else you start feeling sick emotionally, mentally, or physically. The Victorians were specifically obsessed with the blood aspect, and they often thought that you were not feeling well because you had too much blood in you. Now, traditionally, you would remove the blood using a leech, but as a leech bites you, you get a substance put into you by the leech as well, and it helps you heal that wound. This mechanical leech just cuts you. It takes your blood out, but doesn't help you heal the wound. So you get the blood out, that's all good. How much blood? It depends on what your doctor thinks. And it could be a variety of like a pint until you pass out, depending on your issue. There are two issues with this. Number one, infections. So by cutting a wound open, you could lead to infections. The most common treatment for infections was amputations, which surprisingly led to more infections. Number two, it didn't work most of the time. There is science behind taking blood out of you, like blood thinners. There is a point to it, but the way the Victorians were using it was incorrect. And so, for instance, if you come in, sir, and you say you have a headache or a problem with your gut, and I cut you open and I get blood out of you, you come back a week later and you have the same issue. My thinking isn't, oh, I should try something else. My thinking is, I should take more blood out this time. So I'll double or triple the amount of blood I've taken out. And I keep on doing it, and next thing you know, you die out of blood loss. That's what happened to George Washington, the first president of the US, actually. He dies from blood loss because too much blood was taken from him by a doctor. Now, the other important thing to understand is until the 1870s, we did not believe in germs. In fact, if you believed in germs as a doctor, you had your license taken away from you. Germs were too small to see, therefore they could not exist, basically. But slowly, we start to actually change our thinking. Joseph Lister, in the 1800s, develops this machine here called the carbolic acid sprayer, which is kind of like a sanitizer or a disinfectant of sorts. And they start to spray this on their hands and on their tools. And it starts to kill off airborne bacteria. They start to wash their hands in between surgeries. They learn that if you touch a dead body and then help a woman give birth, if you wash your hands in between that process, they're more likely to survive. This may seem like common sense to us nowadays, but for a long time, it didn't make any logical sense to the Victorians or those before them. And at this point in the 1860s, 1870s, there's a lot of things changing. Who can be a doctor is also changing. So the first female doctors appear in the 1860s in Canada. We have Dr. Emily Stowe, who was the first practicing doctor in Canada, and Dr. Jenny Kidd Trout, who was the first licensed doctor. These two women actually went to the US, got their education there, and then they had to come back to Canada to actually practice because no medical school would accept them. Nowadays, if you live in Toronto, you might know of the Women's College Hospital. That is actually the legacy, the leftovers of what they did for the society. Another very important person at this time is Dr. Ortega, and I'm going to get a picture of him in particular. Sorry, folks. Very strong smelling, and sage is often used for cleansing. You call it smudging. See, in Indigenous medicine isn't just, pills and vaccines. It's spiritual cleansing. It's the holistic aspect. So by cleansing yourself with the sage through things like smudging, where you burn it and waft yourself in the smoke, you are cleansing your spirit. We also have cedar, so a tree, cedar tree. Now, I believe this is, Dishwick. And cedar is also another one that's quite healing, holistically and physically. But also, alongside the spiritual help, cedar has a high amount of vitamin C in it. So if you drink a lot of cedar tea in the wintertime, it does help you protect yourself from colds and flus. And our last one is whingash, which is sweetgrass. This one doesn't have as strong of a smell, I will say. Almost like a lemongrassy hint to it. But you'll notice it's braided. And that's the more important part. Sweetgrass is very grounding. So the processing where you take the sweetgrass, you take it apart, and you braid it is a very grounding experience. And often, men who are seen as very aggressive in a community will be tasked to braid sweetgrass as a way to ground themselves, like a therapy of sorts. So we're very lucky. Also a good reminder that
This is a village doctor's place.
Rather than a doctor's office. The main reason I bring you here is actually further on this way. So, you can see in all of the rooms, lots of different wallpaper and decorations, painting and all that stuff. Well, if you notice this green wallpaper around us, this green that you're seeing here is what we call an emerald green or an arsenic green, because it was originally made out of arsenic. No longer, because arsenic is poisonous. Arsenic was used for a lot of different reasons to dye things green. It was used in toothpaste, in paints, in clothing, but also rat poison. So they didn't know that it was poisonous. They just didn't really care. And over time, it would leach into it would come almost released as a gas, and slowly would harm the people who lived in the house. Another main cause of harm was the paint. So lead paint, until very recently, was being used. And that also led to a lot of lead poisoning. Now the biggest one that we also have at this point in time is with the coming of matches. So like for lighting things on fire, early matches use a specific type of phosphorus that was terrible for you. It would disfigure your mouth and basically destroy your face. It was less of an issue for the users of the matches and more of an issue for the makers, which were usually women and children. And they would develop this thing called phossy jaw, which is that disfiguration. Just a reminder that at this time there were a lot of new materials being used. Mercury was being used often in various objects as well. And so it's a good reminder of all that as we're walking around this area, that even if they were living in luxury, they were still poisoning themselves in that luxury. If you'd like, feel free to go upstairs, but we're going to continue onwards if not. Okay, great. So after everyone can go ahead, there we are. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
For the most part, you are going to be taking your medicated medicine from the doctor or from your garden. of medicine that, as I mentioned, included things like, for instance, Ball's worm powder, said to treat things like grinding of the teeth, not eating properly, picking up the nose, restless sleep, coughs, convulsions, etc., in children. Didn't work. Chill syrup, Nervine syrup, all these things that say to help you with things like calming yourself down or for chills. Nowhere does it say the ingredients, because legally they don't have to say their ingredients. That is why they can sneak in things like mercury and other stuff in there. They might just say alcohol in them. That's the most common ingredient listed. But besides that, they could put whatever they want in there, and it can lead to a lot of extra harm done to people. Now, for the most part though, the medicine you're going to be taking is coming from your own house. So using things like the mortar and pestle mainly to crush up various ingredients, various plants. Common gardens in the around the houses of Victorian times included things like lavender for calming you down, spearmint for digestion, and loads of other herbs. So if you come here during the summertime, we have our herb garden, and you can see all the different herbs that we might use to treat ourselves. I'm also here to show you, speaking of the issues of lead and arsenic in your paint, things even including toys. So this tea set here, and anything painted in that green color could often have those trace amounts of lead or arsenic in it. But also you come here to the general store for other ingredients you can't grow in your home. So of course you can grow things like lavender in your backyard. But other spices like cinnamon or clove or nutmeg, which have also been used for medicinal purposes, you'd have to buy it here. So that's why you'd also come here. In a small village, the general store was your connection to the outside world. Think of it as the Amazon or the Walmart of the Victorian era. Everything you want in one spot, no matter how far you are from the big city. Our final location is going to be just down the road. Here we are.
And 1900 centuries time. These are the residences, buildings that people used to live.
White, red, yellow, black. And so these four colors represent various things that come in fours. So the four seasons, for instance, winter, spring, summer, fall. The four directions, same thing, north, east, south, west. The four plants, as I mentioned, as well. And then at the corners of these points are the moments of change. So the spring equinox between winter and spring, or the summer solstice, the fall equinox, and the winter solstice. And in the center of this is the pink. Pink in the Anishinaabe culture represents welcomeness or kindness in particular. So you'll notice we have this structure here. This is the wigwam. It's a very common structure built by the Anishinaabe. Continues to be built to this day. And at the pole is the pink ribbon. And we're going to go in there for a moment, but I just ask, because this is a sacred space, I ask that you follow a few rules before we go in. First of all, there are stumps in there, but they are designated for elders only, so we're not going to sit on them today. And also, when we go in there, we're going to form a circle. So in the Anishinaabe culture, the circular shape is very important. Breaking that circle kind of harms the sacredness of a space. So as we're going in here, I ask that you just follow my footsteps as you walk in one by one into the wigwam. But feel free to come on in and just follow in a clockwise direction as you walk in. This is a relatively newer structure. If you haven't been to in the village for the past 20 years, this is very new to the space. We got some partners, Dr. Hopi, to help us build this structure in our space. Typically, wigwams last about 10 years. They're very strong pieces. On the ground, it's not usually dirt. It is reed mats, which help with insulation and warmth. And the walls usually have bark on them. Birch bark is the most common one because it's kind of waterproof. And you can see in the middle of it those 4 colors I mentioned, along with the other colors revolving around the solstices as well. And you'll notice the yellow is the one closest to the entrance. That is pointing east. East is where the sun rises, is rebirth and renewal. It's also tobacco, the first sacred plant. So I like to end my tour here when it comes out to talk about medicine, because the wigwam is used to this day as a space of healing, spiritually and physically of all sorts. And it's also a good reminder of, as we're seeing all these old buildings here, that there were treaties made amongst the indigenous and Europeans to help each other out to a degree. And many indigenous people taught the Europeans how to take care of themselves in this land, what plants will help them out, what to not touch because it's poisonous, all these things. And it's always good to remind ourselves that the promises they made with each other hundreds of years ago have been broken and are still broken to this day. But it's also a good space of reminding of reflection. So thinking about that sweetgrass I mentioned earlier and the braiding of it together and the intertwining of the wood, the wigwam.
Is it a special kind of wood, or is it
typically it is a cedar or an ash. The main important thing though isn't the type of tree, it is the when you harvest it. So these are all saplings, they're green wood. It's easier to bend them at the center, and depending on which nation you are, you build it a bit differently. Our wigwam is built such that about the wood is about a foot deep into the ground to keep it strong, and the main thing we only change is just the canvas on the outside, nothing else.
How do you fit busloads of kids in this?
Excellent question. If it's a small group of kids and they're older, we do this. If not, we walk in and we walk right out. And then we have a talk outside. Simply because otherwise we come around everywhere, which to a point does fit the indigenous pedagogy of exploration. But some kids like to climb up too much and it can cause damage to themselves, simply put. But yeah, so and this is a working fire space for the sacred fire. When we had that ceremony I mentioned, we held it in the wigwam here, and we did have the fire with the 4 sacred plants around it. But yeah, any questions at the end of our tour? Lovely. So just let you know, we have about an hour left to walk around the village if you'd like, but we are open until 4. Until we start locking up the buildings.
Can you show me where we are on the map?
Yes, I can.
Pure village environment. But man, so actually it was a forest in 18th century, and so far as I know that one guy came here and started farming and created the village. So it's more than 200 years old village. Okay, I think I will walk around the village some more time. Okay. Okay, thank you.